Hi, I'm Lisa Southrank, and I'm going to be giving you the presentation on the Kronos Workforce Scheduler Associate Training for how you will be utilizing this new electronic staffing system. For the test system, you'll be using this Kronos Cloud icon. When it goes live, you'll be using this Kronos Cloud icon. The system goes live as of August 21st, 2017. When you click on the icon, you will put in your username and password for Meditech. When you do that, you should see a screen similar to this. In the top left corner of the black area will be your name with a sign out button underneath of it. We encourage that you sign out after you're done in the application to ensure that you're completely out of the system and no one else can get in under your name and put in any requests for you. I'm going to enlarge the screen using the maximize button in the right hand side so you can get a better view. When you log into the screen, you will see at the top, to the top left of the white, it defaults to current schedule period. Depending on what unit you're in, you may see a 2-week, a 4-week, or a 6-week schedule period. If you need to change the schedule period you're viewing, you use this drop-down arrow next to those words, and it comes up with a list. The Kronos Scheduler does interact with our Kronos timekeeping system for payroll. Because of that, you'll see some extra options that you will really not be utilizing in the system. In scheduling, you'll do the current schedule period or the next schedule period option. If I decide I want to go farther out than my current or next schedule period, there's a calendar icon beside the drop-down. When I click the calendar icon, it brings up a start date and end date. This system does not like to be typed into, so there's a calendar icon on the opposite side of each of those. When you click it open, you can use the arrows to the left and right at the top to pick your month and year. You click on the date. Next to end date, you go to that calendar icon and you can pick the end date you want to look at. And when you hit OK, it'll take you to that time period. In the center of the screen, no matter what schedule period you're looking at, there's always a date range that starts with Sunday and ends with Saturday of each week, and the arrows to the right will take you from week to week, and the arrows to the left will take you back again to the beginning. I'm going to use my arrow to go back to my current schedule period selection. There's 3 other little icons that are all calendars. The first one is if you want to look at one specific day. The middle one goes back to the weekly view that it defaults to when you open it. And the third one is a monthly view. Just remember that your schedule period you pick may overlap 2 months, so you can use your roller on your mouse to go back and forth between the 2 months that you might want to look at. If you use the center one to go back to your weekly view, in the bottom left-hand side, there's the My Accruals button that defaults when you open, and this shows you your current PTO and sick time that you have. Right beside that in the bottom left is a coverage button. When you click on the coverage button, it opens a table. To the top left of that table, it says job. The job defaults to what you're hired for. In this case, it's a 2 North RN. The numbers in the table refer back to this specific job on this specific unit. The first number refers to how many associates of your position on this unit are actually scheduled for that shift. So on this Sunday, For all these time periods, we actually have 3 nurses scheduled. The second number is how many we actually need based on that unit's budget and staffing matrix. So on this Sunday, we actually need 4 nurses scheduled, but I only have 3. The arrows represent that visually, where I'm down, no arrows, where I'm actually right on 4 out of 4. And on the opposite side here, I actually have 5 out of 4 with an up arrow because I'm overstaffed for that shift. In the center of the screen is where your actual shifts will appear once the schedule has been posted. Whether you have a pattern or you're a self-scheduling unit, the manager or scheduler has to post the schedule in order for you to see your shift. Your shifts come up in blue. It's a 2-tone blue. On the lighter blue on the bottom, it tells you your start and stop time in military. Right after that, it tells you the amount of hours that shift is. And the last is a sentence that tells you at the end what unit and what position you're working that day. If you're an associate that can work multiple positions or multiple units, you will see that is different at the end of the sentence. The top in the darker blue is an actual shift label. If you need to refer back to this, it's actually on page 5. Basically, the hospital had to determine a generic way of identifying everyone's start and stop time. So the actual number indicates the start of the hour in which you're coming in or leaving. The letter represents 15-minute increments within that hour. So 6 a.m. is the 6, 19 is 1900. If I wanted to represent 6:15, that's quarter after the hour, so it would be a Q. If I wanted to represent 6:30, that's half past the hour, so it would be an H. And if I want to represent 6:45, that's 3/4 past the hour, so it's a T. So this shift label is 6T for 6:45 or 3/4 after the hour, 19Q for 19:15 or quarter after the hour. The only other place you may see this shift label is on a report that prints for your department, because the reports can only capture a 5-character limit to identify your start and end time. We're going to move into request time off. There are 2 types of request time off in this system, and it's based on whether or not you actually have a shift that's posted that you see on your schedule, thus the blue shifts on the screen. It's also based on our human resource rule of having a half-hour lunch period. So in the 2 shifts we see on the screen, it's all 12.5 hours. We really only get paid for 12 hours unless we work through that break period and swipe that way that we did not take our break. So the first type of request is going to be for a scheduled PTO. In the top right of the white hand screen, there's a request time off button. When you click on that, it brings a pop-up. It does default at first to the scheduled. It then wants to know a start date. So behind the scenes, if I want to request off for next Thursday, the 17th, I would use my calendar icon to click on to pick the 17th of August. If I want one day, the end date is the same as the start date. That's also for night shift. If night shift is coming in at 18:45 on the 17th, the end date is still the 17th. Because I have the shift on my calendar, it recognizes that it's a full day shift for me. If I want to take the entire shift off, I simply click at the bottom the submit button. If I decide maybe I only want off the last 4 hours of my shift. This person happens to work 6:45 in the morning to 7:15 at night. Under duration and this drop down arrow next to full day, when I click it, I have the option of picking hours. When I pick hours, the start time then reflects what time I want to start my vacation. This associate comes in at 6:45 in the morning. They want the last 4 hours of their shift off, so it's going to start at 1500. The length is how long I want to take off. We want the last 4 hours of the shift. So once I have that in, I then click Submit. You'll notice at the top of the day I requested off, August 17th, it now says PTO scheduled. The arrow to the left is a visual symbol that I've submitted that request. When I hover over the words, it comes up and says submitted 1500 to 1900 PTO 4 hours. And anytime I hover over the words at the top, this arrow to the right appears. If I click the arrow to the right, it gives me the option to retract. If my vacation request has not yet been approved, I can retract it. When I click retract, it wants me to submit the retraction. When I click submit, you'll see under the 17th, the arrow to the left changed to an X with a line under it. That's a visual symbol that I've retracted it. And when I hover over top of the words, it tells me what I've retracted. The 1500 to 1900, the 4 hours. When I actually have a PTO that is approved, and I'm just going to click back to find that, you'll see that there's a check mark in front of the PTO. When I hover over the words, it says approved, 1500 to 1900. And as I look down on that day, I also see a green come up on my screen that also shows it's been approved. When I have approved PTO time on my calendar, I no longer have to go to the time clock to swipe it. This automatically flows to my time card. If I am calling out last minute for a PTO occurrence, maybe my child is sick, my dog is sick, I didn't get to shovel the snow that fell, that is not pre-approved. It will not be on my calendar. So for those PTO occurrences, I will still need to go to the time clock and swipe my vacation time for that occurrence. Same thing if I received a low work day and I want to take PTO for that low work day. It's not pre-approved on my calendar. I still have to go to the time clock and swipe that. It will be the same with your sick time. You will still need to go and swipe your sick time. The other type of request for PTO is for something farther out when your schedule may not be posted. So I'm going to click my calendar icon next to my current schedule period drop-down, and I'm going to click next to my start date, that calendar, and I'm going to click out to a month farther away. And pick times I want to look at and hit OK. When I open this time period, you can see the center of my screen is completely white. That means I have no shifts posted. My scheduler or manager has not posted that schedule. In order to request time off when you don't have shifts, again you go to the request time off on the top right of the white section. When I click that, I have to then pick the type. So I click the drop down arrow and I go to PTO unscheduled because I have no scheduled shifts. Again, it wants me to pick my start date and end date. So maybe I want to do a long weekend, and here, this is the beginning of April. I want to request the 2nd and the 3rd of April. So I click my icon next to the start date is the 2nd. I can then click my end date to the 3rd. Because I have no schedule or shifts on my calendar, it only gives me the option of hours. Start time, because I have no schedule there, it wants to know the typical time that I start my shift. This person is starting at 6:45 in the morning. And again, because I have no shift on my calendar, it wants to know how long is my shift typically. This person is a 12-hour shift. I can write any notes I want and click submit. When I click submit, the same thing happens up on top of those days. The arrow to the left shows visually I've submitted it. When I hover, it tells me what I've submitted. And when I hover, the arrow to the right appears. Again, if this has not been approved yet, and I decide I no longer want those days off, my plans have changed, I can retract it by clicking on the arrow that pops up when I hover and clicking retract. When I submit my retraction, same thing happens, the X with the line under it to visually show, and when I hover, it states retracted. Because I submitted 2 days in the one request, when I retracted, both days were retracted for the 2nd and the 3rd. So just be aware, if you only wanted 1 day retracted, you'd have to go back in and request just 1 day off, since they both retract when you use that way of doing it. The other 2 options under request time off in the top right, and when you click the down arrow under type, the 3rd option is RDO, which stands for request day off. This is used more for self-scheduling units. It's to identify a day that those associates do not want to be moved to during the balancing period. It identifies that day on the calendar in green, so when the manager or scheduler goes into balance, they know to try not to move the associate to that day. It does not give any PTO to the associate for that day. The last option under request time off is request low census. This can be used if you know in the future there's a day you would like to be considered for low census. So if your unit is functioning off of the amount of cases that you do each day or the amount of patients you have, you would use this. We did put a 72-hour time frame on this because of the weekend. Your managers and schedulers will not be here through the weekend to see these requests. And if you utilize the nursing supervisor, they will not be getting these requests. If you know ahead of time, next Wednesday, that you would like to have that ability to take off early if the census drops, you could put this in, and then the staffing office will see that. Your manager or scheduler would see that, and we could print it off on a report for them to see also. And we had one, wrong way. We had one here, but apparently it's not cooperating right now to find that one. The other options that you have, in the top right-hand side, there's a More button. With that More button, you can request someone to cover your shift. When I click it open, I go down to Request to Cover. When I click on Request to Cover, it brings up this pop-up. Again, it wants to know what date. So maybe next Friday the 18th, I'd like to get someone to work for me. So again, I use the calendar icon. I open it. I pick the date I want. It brings up my shift. It then calculates a list of associates who are not working on this day that may be able to pick up for me. When it does this initial list, it is not smart enough to know who is full-time. A full-time person would not be able to pick up my shift because it would create overtime. So as you're looking through this list, you would want to look for people who are pool, casual, part-time, or regular part-time. You can pick up to 3 associates. If you did happen to pick an associate that was full-time, when you went to submit, it would not allow you to submit. It would tell you that they will create overtime and you'd have to go and unclick them. So if I pick some people, I can write any personal note to them, and then I hit submit. And it provides rule violations if there are any for that also, and will not let you submit. So when I do submit it, it will come across the top of my screen. Let's see if I can find one in here. And there's not one coming up. But at the top of that day I requested, it would come up instead of PTO or these other terms, it would say request to cover. That request goes to the actual associate's inbox through this Kronos system, as well as sending them an actual email to the Doylestown Hospital internal email. When that associate receives either of those notifications, they would log into their Kronos scheduling account. They would go to the day where that request to cover shows up. When they hover, the arrow to the right appears, and when they click the arrow, it will give them the option to accept that request to cover or to refuse that request to cover. If the associate accepts it, the requester gets a notification, as well as the scheduler or manager gets a notification. When the scheduler or manager approves that request to cover, the requester is removed from the schedule, and the person that is going to cover the shift is automatically put on to the schedule. Again, once that person's on the schedule, they're responsible for that shift. If the person requesting it is full-time or regular part-time, you need to maintain a certain number of hours each week for your benefits. So the requester would then have to go back in to request time off at the top right-hand side and put in the PTO request for that day that they have another associate covering for them. Once they do that and their PTO is approved, the PTO on the calendar will flow over to their time card. That is for an entire 12-hour shift, 10-hour shift, whatever your full shift is. If you wanted someone just to cover the last 4 hours of your shift, you would not be able to use that request to cover function. You would have to find your replacement. Maybe that's through texting, calling, speaking to your coworkers. You would then go into request to cover, or request time off, and you go back to your PTO scheduled and put in the time frame with a note that says, Susie will cover my 3 to 7 shift, and then you'd submit it. When you submit that and your manager approves it, you are taken off the last 4 hours that you might have requested, as in this example here. That 4-hour shift is then put up to the top here into a light pink section for open shifts. In order to confirm that Susie is going to pick up that time for you, Susie would have to log into her Kronos application and pick up that open shift. and we'll get into open shifts and how you do that in just a minute. The second piece that you can do, maybe you want to take that day off, but you don't want to use vacation time. I want to try and switch with somebody. So again, under the More tab in the top right-hand side, when I click that open, I have a request shift swap. When I click on that, it brings up another pop-up. Under date, it wants to know the date I'm currently on the schedule. So I'm going to click my calendar. I'm going to pick the 18th. It'll bring up my shift I'm scheduled for that day. The second date it's looking for, the swap with, is the date I'd rather work. So in my calendar behind this pop-up, I am not on Saturday the 19th, so I'd rather work that day instead of Friday the 18th. So again, I click that calendar icon open, I pick the 19th. It then brings up another list of associates. This list of associates are all people who are working on Saturday the 19th. Again, this list is not perfect when it's pulled. It does not identify people who might also be working on Friday the 18th, so they would not be able to switch with me. If I click that person, when I hit submit, it would give me an error message if that person was also working the same day I wanted to try and get off of, and I'd have to pick another associate. In this list, you'll notice that the start time of the shift, it pulls both people working days and night shift. So make sure you're picking the appropriate shift when you're picking someone to switch with. Again, after you pick a person and submit, that associate will get an email through the Doylestown Hospital internal email system, as well as a notification or alert through this Kronos scheduling system. When the associate sees that notification or the email, they would log back into their Kronos application. They would go to the date of the requested shift swap, the 18th and 19th. At the top of their screen, instead of the words here, you would see request shift swap. Again, when you hover, an arrow always pops up to the right. When you click that arrow, you would get the accept or refuse. If the associate accepts the shift swap, a notification goes to the original requesting associate as well as the manager and scheduler. Once the manager or scheduler approves that swap, the shifts are immediately swapped on the calendar, as well as another notification going back to both associates that the swap was approved. If the second associate refuses the shift swap, the original requesting associate will get a notification back saying that associate has refused the shift swap. Picking up open shifts. So if I decide on Saturday the 19th I am off, but I'd like to pick up open shift. This is the way the pool and casual will pick up their open shifts. And this is the way an associate wanting extra time would pick up open shifts. In the top, underneath of the date, is that light pink row. If there are shifts that I am eligible to pick up, it will say open, and in parentheses will have the amount of shifts that are open for me to pick up. When I hover, the arrow to the right appears. When I click on the arrow, request shift appears. When I click on request shift, it brings me up a list of all the open shifts that I am eligible to pick up. Again, you can note in this second column is the actual start time of the shift. So again, it's bringing up both days and nights for this unit. The third column brings up the amount of hours. These are all 12.5-hour shifts. If there was a 4-hour shift, a 2-hour shift, it would show up. And at the end of this string or sentence, it also tells me what unit and what position. So again, if I'm an associate that can pick up in multiple units or multiple positions, I want to take note of that when I go to pick up my shift. If I decide that Saturday I would like to pick up on 2 South as an RN on day shift, I click the circle in front of that shift. Whole shift defaults. If I want to pick up the entire shift, I simply go to the bottom and click submit. If I decide I would like to help out but don't want to be there the whole shift, there's a partial shift option. By clicking in front of the partial shift words, I choose that option. I then need to tell the system when do I want to come in or when do I want to leave. My first option is staying till the end of the shift, but maybe since it's my day off, I don't want to get up early, but I'll come in at 11 o'clock. Or my second option is to pick the start time at the beginning of the shift, 6:45, but maybe I just want to leave at 1500 and submit. When I submit, it should come up at the top of my schedule by saying open shift request. When I hover, it shows me I've submitted it for a start time of 6:45 for an 8-hour shift. The arrow to the left again shows that visually I've submitted it, and when I hover, the arrow to the right pops up. Before this open shift request is approved, if I decide that I no longer can do that shift, when I click on the arrow that comes up to the right, it does give me the ability to retract. If that open shift request was already approved, it would show up as a shift on my calendar. I could no longer retract it. I would have to go back to my manager or scheduler and ask them to remove the shift if they're able to allow me to come off. That is the same thing with PTO requests. If it's already been approved, I can no longer retract it, and I have to ask my scheduler or manager to take it off and put me back on the schedule. We're going to talk about the alert bar and getting notifications, so I'm just going to minimize my screen down a minute. Notifications in this system will come across the top bar called an alert bar. In the center of that bar is an envelope. When I click on that envelope, if I have a number to the top right, it'll show me what the notification is. And if I click View All, it'll bring me to a screen which will show me, and enlarge it a little bit, what it is. If I want more details, when I hover, a Details button comes across to the right that I can click Open and click Shut. Just going to minimize again. When I'm in this screen, I can also go to My Inbox by clicking on any words, and the My Inbox comes up, where again it will give me messages as to schedulers being opened and closed for signups, alerts about what has been approved, could be vacation time, and if I've asked someone else to cover a shift, requested a shift swap, it'll also show that. To exit out, I simply click the X next to the tabs that I've opened. When I'm back on my main screen, I also have a My Inbox tab on the right in the light blue column that takes me directly to my inbox. As I said, the alert or notification will also come through to your Doylestown Hospital internal email, and you can respond from there back into Kronos to do anything with accepting or refusing those requests. An example of what you'll get in your email is on page 17 of the training material. Also to the right of the screen, in that blue column, you'll see a unit schedule button. When you click on that, your schedule will come across the top row. Any eligible shifts that you can pick up come across the bottom. Towards the top left, if you want to change what you're looking at, you can do the drop down and pick different periods. If you do pick a different period, you then have to hit the apply button for that to come across. If you want a printable view of your schedule, you can click the printable view button. It reads across in a linear view left to right with your date, start time, end time. It will show you of any dates you've requested a low census or PTO. From this screen, if you wanted to print, you would have to do your Control and P button on your keyboard to actually print it out. Again, you can exit by the X in the tab. When you're in the Unit Schedule button to the top left, the dark blue button that says View Location Schedule, if you click on that, again, your schedule comes across the top. The rest of your coworkers' schedules come across the bottom. If you maximize that screen, there's a scroll bar that pops up that you can go back and forth to see those shifts in the time period you've selected. And you can close with the X. And you can get out of this by the X on that tab. The other thing that this system does is a feature called SMS texting. Your managers or HR gave you a form to make sure you've identified your contact numbers, if you wanted a home email address, and then also your emergency contact information. With those regular contact numbers for you, they should give you the option of picking SMS texting. If you opt in for this, it means that in this scheduling system, we have the ability to send out a mass text letting you know of open shifts. For example, if your unit's supposed to have 7 staff people on, maybe the flu has gone through your unit and 5 just called out, leaving you with 2 staff people that day. That's a critical shortage that we need to try and fill immediately. The staffing office, managers, schedulers, and supervisors could use this function in the computer to pick the associates with the skill set for your unit and send out a mass blast text to just those associates. That text will tell them the unit, the time frame needed, and let them know how to reply back through a text back to accept that shift. It's a first come, first serve. Those that respond back will get a notification that that shift has been accepted and approved, and that associate should be on their way into work to fill that shift. If another person responds back after the shift has already been filled by a first associate, the second associate will receive a text back that the shift was already filled and we no longer would need them to come in. If you had filled out a form and you were not familiar with SMS texting but would now like to opt in for that, you can go to Human Resources and ask to update your information on that. The last piece to cover is self-scheduling. If you're a self-scheduling unit, you want to pick the time frame that's going to be open in the future for scheduling. For this demonstration, we've opened a time period in November through December. Again, I'm just going to maximize my screen. You can see on the left the time period I have open. In the center, again, is my list of dates. And the More button on the top right is what I want to click. I then have an option to request self-schedule. When I click on that option, it brings me to this screen. Again, the top left is the weeks. I have a 4-week period open, so I can use my arrows to go through to each week. or go back again to the beginning. The other thing I want to ensure is open at the bottom is my coverage tab, so that I have my table available to see how many are scheduled and how many I need. My job to the top left of that table again defaults to my unit and my actual position I was hired for. When I'm self-scheduling, each unit's time frames that they work will be listed down that day, and there'll be a circle in front of each time period. This example is a telemetry unit that does 12-hour days and 12-hour nights. If your unit does 8-hour shifts, you may see a 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7 option for you, or many other options depending on the departments. I would go week to week. I would pick, by clicking the circle in front of the shift, which shifts I want. When I get done choosing my options, I would then go up to submit. When you're picking your options, you want to look at your numbers. Unfortunately, if your number might be full, maybe I did have 4 out of 4 scheduled this day, it will still let me pick the shift with the circle, but when I go to submit, it would give me an error message stating over coverage. So in order to save time and have less frustration, if you are looking at your numbers and you see a shift is already full, 4 out of 4, 3 out of 3, whatever your unit staffs to, you would not select that shift. You would instead pick another shift that week, which was still open and needed associates to work. If you're a unit that opens a scheduling period and it is a free-for-all when you go in to pick your shifts, you may want to consider the fact that I have a specific day on a specific week that I have to work. If that is the case, you might want to arrow forward to that week, go directly to that shift you know is a necessity for you, and click submit right away, locking that shift in place. You could then go back into request self-schedule to complete the rest of your weeks. Once you hit submit, you can no longer change any of your submitted shifts that you want to work for that time period. If you determine that, oh, I clicked Friday, I really meant to click Thursday, you would have to talk to your manager or scheduler, have them remove the shift you signed up for an error, and then you'd have to go back in to request self-schedule and try and pick a different shift if it's still available. Before you click submit, you can unclick and click anything within this period. Once you hit submit, usually on the first day of the first week you've submitted will come self-schedule wording. When you hover, the arrow to the right appears. When you click on the arrow, details comes up. When you click on details, it comes up with a list of the shifts that you've signed up for. If you've submitted one shift at a time, or you went to week 3 to submit the one day you knew you had, you will see another self-scheduling wording on that day. And again, when you click on that arrow in details, it'll show you just that day that you've submitted. At this point, I think all of the computers on the units have a test icon on them, and you can test at any time. It does not impact the normal live system. If you have any questions, concerns as you go through the testing, or even after we go live, in your actual handout for associate training on the second page, there is a group email for the scheduling team. You can send an email to that at any time, and we will get back to you to answer your question or help you walk through how to complete a task. Thank you for your time.